That the artist can lead that conversation. And historically it was, folks like me who were sort of telling artists, what to think and how the audience should frame them, people like Clement Greenberg and so forth. And we have this moment where, at the same moment as these artists are working with AI, and it's a conversation about human and machine interaction, this art that I speak of is on some level visual, but it's also textual, it's also often non-visual and conceptual. And as a result, it is highly complex, and the participants and the exponents are all highly intelligent. And one of the things that I think is worth stressing about the NFT space is just the level of intellect of both the artists, who are invariably scholars, researchers, as well as practicing artists, but also, the collectors. Everyone who participates in this space is either it's their professional occupation or it's their private passion, but it's something we're all quite committed to. And just for my part, running Right-Click Save, the key thing is to establish really an ethical framework for looking at this generation of artists. I think I'll shut up now. I think one of the fundamental things, because we don't have a huge amount of time and we have a very wide range of practices, is probably to ask every artist, and Sofia Garcia, who's a curator, to perhaps stake out their practice, because I think given this diversity and also given this critical vacuum that I think does exist, we need a certain amount, we need some legibility, and we need some literacy, but of course you can't have literacy without language, and so I need simple language. So guys, please introduce your practices, and it's this is wonderful to have you all here.
Wonderful. Well, hi everyone. My name is Sofia Garcia. I am a curator. I'm also the founder of ArtX Code, really just focused on bringing forward and basically a cheerleader for generative art in all capacities. I advise artists, collectors, institutions on all things. And a big part of what I do is education, really trying to contextualize and frame what it is that artists are doing today, how they're working, what their practice is, and trying to distill that to the everyday person. It's my mission, but please take it away.
My name is Felicon. I'm an artist who shares a studio practice with Sophia here. Together we have the studio Entangled Others, which focuses on nature, ecology, and bringing the more than human or the natural world into the digital through the artistic medium. I think I'll let Sophia sort of add to that.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Sofia Crespo, as Falcon said, generative artist. We work together since 3 years. We run a really small artist studio based on ecology and generative art, and bringing visibility to non-human creatures that often don't get much spotlight. That's basically what we do.
I'm Ross Goodwin. I'm an artist, and my work focuses on exploring new forms and interfaces for writing. Probably, if you were here in 2018, you might have seen the Dayglow Red Lion in Trafalgar Square that I helped put up with Ez Devlin. You could feed the lion a word and it would roar poetry back at you, but that's sort of indicative of the type of work I make.
Hi everyone, my name is Sasha Stiles. I'm a poet, I'm also a visual artist and an AI researcher, and I'm also co-founder of the Verse, which is a literary gallery that is devoted to poetry NFTs and really considers how we can use blockchain to unlock new realms of writerly creativity. I do a lot of work with natural language processing. I have an AI-powered co-author who I can talk more about later today, but I really just love exploring the intersection of text and technology.
Hi, I'm Mario Klingemann. I'm also an artist. I think I'm curious and I love discovering things. So I like to understand anything, and I'm using AI as a petri dish to discover things and understand complex systems. So yeah.
Thank you. I don't want to lower the tone of the conversation, but I will. I think one of the things about having such a diversity of practices is to, for me at least, is to try and find a way to unify them. And I suspect, this may not be true, but I suspect without the NFT, we probably wouldn't be sitting on this stage. So I want to just pose the question, even though we're supposed to be talking about AI, of how the NFT perhaps has altered or not altered in any way your thinking about your work. Sophia.
I mean, for me, as someone who organizes exhibitions, it has and has not changed the way that I work in a few different ways. I think the main way that it's changed is how I package up the artwork. Before, I used to have the code printed out and all of these things to really facilitate the conversation between what you're looking at visually and what produced it in the back end. But I think now with exhibition design in the NFT space, that is probably one of the most important things that I try to talk about as much as possible, because I think now we just see people throw things on TV screens and call it a day, and it's so much more than that, and that's just it's a whole other conversation. But high level, that's really what what I think about on my day-to-day. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more important that you guys to really talk about how it's changed your practice. It's fascinating.
I mean, I personally wish that we were sitting somewhere else in a panel, even without NFTs, but I am happy that NFTs exist. I guess like the way that, well, speaking for both of us, that we see them is kind of as a channel to show our work, but it's not a medium in itself for us. So in the same way that, I would before like print an artwork, even though I'm not a professional printmaker, and that's not the tool I'm using to communicate my art. It was just kind of like a channel to make my art accessible to others and be able to have it like on the wall, etc. So yeah, that's, I don't know if you want to.
No, I think I can just quickly add to that it's been nice with the process of sort of getting into the world of NFTs has been that it has added a greater legitimacy to the digital artwork in itself, which has given us the opportunity to allow us to focus on artworks that, take advantage of the digital, and then simultaneously also then with the physical artworks we do to focus on what qualities really make them interesting. So it allows you to sort of better avoid compromise in the sort of articulation of the works themselves.
I'm really new to the NFT space. I'll just say that. I'm not new to digital art. I've been making the kind of art I make now with text since 2014, maybe even a little longer than that. But NFTs are something that I sort of didn't start thinking about until recently. I didn't build my practice around selling work to collectors. I built my practice around creating experiences for visitors and for viewers and users. And I think that NFTs have allowed me to think about reframing some of those experiences in a way that people could actually collect the work and without compromising the concept behind it, which I think is really important. But yeah, new to the space and very excited to be involved.
Well, as a poet, I can say that getting involved in this space and starting to make NFTs has been absolutely game-changing. In fact, I feel like we could devote an entire panel to all the ways that NFTs have changed the writing practice. And actually, there is a panel on this later today at 4 o'clock, so please come back for that, and I'll get into it much more. But in terms of community, in terms of currency, in terms of creativity, in all these ways, it's really revolutionized what I do. I come from a very traditional poetry background. I've been publishing in literary journals for decades, I'm sorry to say. And, I spend a lot of time in writing workshops with a lot of other writers. And I've been working with tech tools. I've been working with digital tools and animating poetry and using AI in my poetry for years now. And I found that there was a lot of resistance to what I was doing when I would go back into my traditional poetry circles and the traditional literary and publishing worlds. So I think in terms of the community, coming into the NFT space has really enabled me to explore the things that I want to explore and feel very welcome and feel very encouraged to bring together interdisciplinary approaches to poetry in a way that I wasn't able to do before. There were no, real outlets to publish video poems or weird sort of AI-generated texts, things that you might not see in like the New Yorker or whatever. So I've really felt liberated in lots of ways to pursue the things that I'm interested in pursuing, and at the same time, I've actually had a way to self-publish things that I wouldn't have been able to publish in a print venue. So I can publish a video poem, I can publish a media-rich poem that has spoken word and original music and visual animations, and things that had been sitting on my desktop and just kind of languishing there, things that I'd maybe been just posting on Instagram and that only my friends would see. I can now actually sell, and I can make money from poetry, which is something that pretty much no poet in history has ever been able to do. So it's been revolutionary in lots of ways, and I'm really, really grateful to be part of this community for all those reasons.
Yeah, so I think one aspect that I find interesting that the audience for digital works got so much bigger and broader. And we have been doing digital art and AI art before, but also, you have to package it much more elaborately. I mean, you cannot just put up a screen. I mean, you can do it, you could, but still, like if you wanted to sell something, you in a way had to build a lot of stuff around it to make it worth putting in a gallery. And now it's much more direct. Yeah, you can, exactly. You sometimes have things that you think are great, but like maybe they are too plain or too feel too small to kind of put them out there as a piece, but now you can do that and you can still do bigger things. And of course, yes, the aspect of then you can even sell it without, again, like making elaborate packages for a USB stick where the package costs more, gives you a lot of freedom. So for me, NFTs means I have more freedom to do more what I like doing. So that's pretty amazing.
I kind of just want to touch on the first time I ever organized an online-only NFT show and everything sold. I was like, oh my God, I didn't have to handle any production costs. I didn't have to handle shipping. It was just such a wonderful experience to facilitate the sales, make sure the artist got paid. We took our commission, and it was a breeze. So yeah, the packaging and making sure everything involved in the physical exhibition is just no longer necessary. And I think the coolest part is now being able to engage with the work in its native environment, on the computer, especially when we're talking about generative art or anything that's on chain, and you get to really experience the performance of the work in its native environment. And I will always underline that is just the coolest thing, especially as a generative art collector myself and just a big nerd about it. So.
I think because we're supposed to be talking about AI, we're also therefore talking in a way about how artists relate to machines, or how human artists relate to machines, or how human artists self-identify as an individual or as a dual agent. Mario, if I can just talk to you for a moment, that it seems to me by introducing Botto, you have this almost, I don't want to say body double, but you have this other self that's operating and that is directly in a Web3 context, isn't it? Could you just say something about how Botto's doing?
So maybe for those who don't know what Botto is, it's an autonomous, decentralized artist. So there is an AI which keeps on creating visual work, and it's kind of sitting there on a server. And there is a community of shareholders who every day can vote on proposals that Botto makes. So they decide, we like this better than that. And every week Botto, that data feeds back Botto's training algorithm, and every week there is one actually piece selected then that gets the most votes that is minted. And so in a way, Botto is actually not me. So that's the thing. But the idea was, can I create something that is an entity that eventually gets viewed as an artist? So it's also like a long-term experiment, because it's not enough as an artist to make pretty pictures. Actually, the whole thing is much bigger, because anybody can make pictures, but to to be called an artist, and there are all these other elements, like you have to have a biography. You have to have something like maybe a vision that people can see in you. So right now Botto is like 7 months old, and it's selling really well, but of course now everything but it's autonomous. I do not really touch it anymore, and well, what can I say? But the plan is that it will evolve, because that's the difference between a machine artist and a human artist now, that humans are constantly evolving and changing, collecting new impressions, and a machine is usually just sitting there, trained on a certain state of time and data. And that is kind of what Botto is doing now. It's sitting there. The only input it gets is the votes from its human community. But it's also part of the plan that once technology allows you to get more input, get new models, that will happen. And but let's say from the bucket list of what an artist needs to do to become a successful artist or be seen as one, Botto has already kind of checked a few. So had its first 2 solo shows, sold for more money than I have. And I don't get a single cent of that. I mean, I'm a shareholder in Botto as anybody else, but I thought afterwards, maybe I should have taken 10% of all that stuff, but no, that's not the thing. So it's actually my idea is that Botto is able to pay for its own rent, and that's also possible. Actually, Botto is paying humans. So the money earns goes to, of course, there's a team of people who have to do community and make phone calls with galleries, all these things the machine cannot do yet, which are something an artist has to do or has an agent for. And so that's the thing. I'm trying to get to the point where Botto can do all these things, but it's a long road.
Mario, you talked a little bit about the involvement of the audience and in Botto's working practice or process or praxis. And I just wondered, I think it is probably fair to say that one of the things that does crop up a lot in Web3 is this idea of a distributed form of creativity. Collectors have, it seems, a lot more agency in the production of, for example, generative art outputs. We published a text this year called Generative Art and the Decentralization of Creativity. It's what Mario talks about, this idea of producing an autonomous artist. It seems, whilst separate and distinct from Web3, it's coincidental with it. Sasha, we wrote this week a little bit about the participation of a reader. Of course, the history of the author and the death of the author and the birth of the reader is quite a long one. But I wonder how kind of AI perhaps changes that conversation or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've thought a lot about over the past few years, just thinking about what it means to read and understand a text, what is required to do that. It's made me think a lot about, creativity and cognition in the human mind, and then kind of looking at how that's mirrored or not mirrored in machine mind files has been really interesting and motivating to me. And also thinking about the future readers who may be sort of coming up and, how they're going to be interpreting and understanding the signs that we're sort of leaving behind. So that's definitely a motivating factor for sure. I think in terms of, I'm very inspired by what Mario's done with Botto, and I've also, done quite a lot of, thinking about how autonomous writing, how automated writing has had a long tradition in the poetry world and in the literary world. And I'm thinking quite a lot with Ross and with the folks at the Verse about how we can kind of continue to evolve that tradition using our new technological tools. So, thinking back to the tradition of folks like the Surrealists and the Dadaists and the Futurists and my favorites, the Beat poets and other writers who were using spontaneous writing, and they kind of treated it like a kind of just a flow of an unconscious flow of information coming directly, from some source, and how that would sort of reveal these mystic truths that because we human writers are actually, we are programmed to write in a certain way. We are sort of coded by what we've read and what we've been taught. So this kind of tapping into some sort of an unconscious flow is actually a way of freeing yourself from the biases or the cliches or the metaphors or what have you that sometimes characterizes human writing. So there's actually something very like fundamental and pure and kind of true that comes out of that automated flow. So I think the idea of creating autonomous artists or autonomous writers is in the case of what we're doing with our Versa project, which is here today, is to really kind of tap that vein and look at what we might be able to learn about kind of the whole corpus of humanity's written history, what we might be able to learn about ourselves by using these massive intelligent systems to kind of sift through everything that's available to them and process them and synthesize them and come back and kind of present them to us in ways that we individually might not be able to do. So I'm really fascinated by that, and what that says about how machines are able to sort of read humanity's literary record, I think is really a constant source of motivation and inspiration for a lot of the work that I do. But I would love, like, if Ross might talk a little bit more about Versa and what you think about Alex's question. Yeah, can you rephrase the question?
Can't remember.
Yeah. You don't remember? It's all right. It was about readers and writers. I think one thing I've said in the past. Sorry, I was just going to say, because
maybe Sasha talked a bit about tools, and I wondered if you would say something about word camera as well.
Sure. I guess just to start, AI is a lot like the invention of the camera, in my opinion, and we talked about this at some point. But it takes something that we didn't think could be automated and automates it somehow, mysteriously, in ways that even engineers struggle to understand. And it's important to remember, if you look at the history of photography, that people thought the camera was going to totally kill painting. Painting was dead in the water at that point. But instead, what we saw was the camera becoming the source of photorealistic images, and painting kind of being free to move on to other subjects. And we have the rise of modernism, and all the art movements of the 20th century followed after. So in a way, the camera set painting free, and I think that's what I hope AI can do for writing and for us and for other forms as well. But what I was going to say though about tools, I guess, and readers and writers is that in a way, when we use AI, we become like the writer of the writer, writers of writers. It abstracts out a level, and the tools and. I wouldn't say the tool becomes an autonomous thing necessarily. It's still something you interact with, and there's still an interface between the human and the machine. But as that interface becomes more natural and more fluid, we can get into these confusing philosophical areas, many of which I think can be avoided by avoiding human-shaped AI. AI doesn't need to be human-shaped. Which I think is something we forget a lot, because science fiction kind of teaches us that it does, but those depictions in science fiction are based on human workers, which were being commented on science fiction's a mirror of the times that it was written in, subhuman working conditions were being highlighted in a lot of those narratives about artificial intelligence, not actual robots. At the same time, we think now that AI has to be this walking, talking thing with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head, and it's sort of arrogant in a way, and also problematic in other ways. But it's probably too long of an answer.
Not at all. I want to because I want to sort of be respectful to everyone's individual practices. I mean, obviously one of the fundamental conversations surrounding the blockchain right now is proof of work. We're going to extract more from the environment. Proof of stake, which is not a terribly egalitarian alternative. Sophia and Felicon, your work does engage directly with the kind of this interface between digital and natural ecologies. And I love it, Felicon, when you mentioned the idea of the more than human in relation to nature rather than to machines, which is, or as it were, I don't know what language I'm supposed to be using here, like, I suppose nature as a machine in a certain sense. And perhaps you could introduce how you see that kind of, that borderline between natural and digital.
So this could go off on a very long tangent, which I'll try not to for the sake of everyone. But a lot of what we've been working on is really trying to sort of erode away at some of these constructed barriers. Now, a lot of our language is very binary in nature. We talk about us, human, non-human, digital, physical. And the reality of this, our modern world, is that these things are very much entangled and entwined with each other. You know, if you click a button online, you're going to have some effect on the physical world, just like the weather and other calamities like pandemics will affect the nature of your digital world. So these worlds are very much entwined. You know, you can look at power plants that consume raw materials to generate electricity as part of the digestive system of the digital, if you will. There are all these interlinked consequences between the two, and because we have had this very much a focus on, I like to think of it as platonic interfaces. You know, your phone is very platonic and it somehow is, you know, elevated above the world. It's not mucky or biased or so on. The design of all the interface buttons is, you know, somehow disconnected from the world. You know, it's this purity of thing. And this is, of course, very problematic when we want to talk about ecology and interaction, because a lot of the way we design our digital worlds is divorced from, you know, consequence in the physical. So a lot of what our work has been trying to use, especially AI tools, as ways of making tangible the more than human world as we see it. Because the thing is, we cannot, as Sophia likes to say when we give talks, you can't really imagine a color you haven't yet seen, right? We have a boundary and a limit to our imagination, and a lot of what we find online is that the data we have of the natural world is, you know, terrible at best. Usually it's very, very very limited, and therefore, you know, our imagination of the more than human world is equally limited. However, because of the scale involved, you know, the sheer amount of data we have online, it's very hard to read these tendencies. And for us, we've been using these digital tools as a way of, you know, taking, for example, let's say several 100,000 images of jellyfish collected online. You know, by looking for jellyfish, right, you amass, you know, a massive amount of images of jellyfish, and you can train a neural network on these images, and what you get is kind of an essential essence of that original data set. You know, these are the patterns that were, you know, prominent and emerged from the data. And this is fascinating because what you actually get, though, is just images of one stage of the jellyfish life cycle. The jellyfish has some 7 life cycle stages. They're radically different, but we have no real data about it, so we can't see that world. So a lot of what we try and do with this is trying to figure out what are the limits and make those limits of our imagination tangible as a way of trying to inspire curiosity and interest and action in trying to learn more about that world and find ways of, you know, building compassion to that, because there's just so much that we don't see and experience. So we need to, as artists, at least for us, is to explore how can we create feedback loops that help, you know, not change things, but just hopefully nudge them a little bit in a different direction, you know, because we have this fantastic opportunity, you know, of all the digital and physical. We can build these incredibly interesting mechanics and experiences that in turn, you know, can enrich us and also hopefully humble us in the face of this incredibly diverse and rich world we have around us. I will stop ranting now. Do you want to add something, Sophia, to that? Okay.
I mean, no, we just, I think a big part of what we do is kind of based on assuming that we are biased. I mean, there's no such thing as unbiased art. At least I'm open to discussion, but I don't think that there is such thing as unbiased art, because we are always making biased decisions. The only thing that we can do is attempt to reduce bias, but that's kind of like more saying like, okay, I'm going to try to look in that direction, but I'm still going to look in the other directions anyway. So, yeah.
Just wonder, Sophia was reflecting on all these different practices, as someone who works with such a variety of artists, how you kind of reconcile and understand and kind of, I guess, make that saleable in a certain way, when the ideas are so rich and often not terribly well understood by the public at large.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note that I have a background in engineering and art, so I very much appreciate the technical background that is happening with all this artwork. But for me, when I look at AI work specifically, the data sets that are being used, I think, are always the most interesting for me. When AI and GAN models just like started coming out, we saw a lot of just like very like European-centric artwork coming out, and so to using data sets from like the museums that have like unleashed all their artwork and stuff like that. So when I started to see really interesting compositions coming out, and even like the text-based work, and Sophia's like very like biological. Harshit Agrawal also, he's an Indian artist, and he trained all of his models on Hindu artwork, like things like that. I found fascinating. So for me, it's really trying to see. Helena Serene, also just needed to shout her out. She's amazing. Seeing the way that artists are engaging with their data sets, and they are curators as well. They're being very specific about what they're feeding their models to start playing around, and kind of like sculptors in a way to finally get that final output that is quote unquote worth showcasing. For me, I just appreciate it. I see it. I think it's fascinating the way in which all these different artists utilize their practice to produce really fascinating compositions. So whenever I see that and I see the story, that makes my life a lot easier because it's easy to talk about.
I think while I've got the artists here, I think I just wonder, like from my perspective, it's a very selfish question, but I would like artists to be, in a sense, dictating the terms on which their art is understood. And I just wonder whether, perhaps before we finish, we could go through each of you and just feel free not to say anything at all, because historically asking artists to talk about their work was faux pas, but increasingly it's sort of part of the kind of culture of engagement. Wetware. So I just wonder, I don't want to sort of ask Felicon what's the difference between your work and Mario's, but I sort of do. Like,
what is the difference?
Felicon?
You have no, go first. No, you go first.
I knew this would happen.
Oh gosh, that's a tricky one. Can we actually even compare? I mean, the work that me and Sophia do has, an incredibly specific focus, really. We focus entirely on the modern human world and try to work with different ways of engaging with ecology and questions of ecology through that. And that's really what we do, and that's what we're interested in, and we hope that creates resonance with those who view the artworks. But at the same time, that's not necessarily at all how Mario views or works with his works, which are awesome and amazing artworks, by the way, but they, at least from what I've seen so far, unless you've been hiding some ecological works away somewhere, you have your own focus and your own topics on that, they explore a different aspect of the world, but I think they sort of, I don't really want to say compare it.
It's difficult.
I don't want to break it down into comparison, because that's weird too,
Okay, maybe... Well, I think I always try to make things that I find difficult for myself, in the same sense that, like, if it feels too easy, then I try to move on, which means that sometimes what I do might look kind of not so pleasing. So I would say your works all look beautiful and very aesthetic, and like the topics you choose are, of course, a lot of people can relate to them because yes, there's nature and there is heckle or something like so. And no, I'm not saying that it's easy. Sorry. So that's the thing. But like I would probably think, oh yeah, that's something you would do. So I have to move to a different space, and then. Where I don't know where I think I'd always try to go where nobody else will bother to go, because then I hope that I'm alone there for a while, and that means yes that I kind of stay away from topics that feel like yes this is what people can relate to, and that's I'm sure that somebody will do that. So.
Funny enough, I just feel like it's a fun anecdote here. The first NFT I ever acquired was from Mario, and it's a screenshot of a tweet, and it's a tweet that said this guy, I forgot his name, saying I screenshot your NFT, now I own it, and his response, I screenshot your tweet, now I sell it. And I bought it. I thought it was amazing. But yeah,
thank you, because I like that one. Yes, so.
I think one of the things that comes across is the possibility of using words like aesthetics and analyzing this work on a visual basis. But I wonder whether that's a bit old hat in a certain sense, or at least analyzing this kind of work on a purely visual basis is no longer sufficient. I just wonder, just finishing with the poets, whether how it feels to be here talking about images. And whether we need to move past this kind of binary distinctions between text and image, which is obviously what art history is all about, using words to talk about images.
I think that images and text, there's not a binary distinction there. I think it's a very complicated vector, if anything. First of all, there are far more forms than just image and text. Those are two forms that creative work can take, but there are far more forms we can imagine. There's music. There's I'm a little jet lagged still, so I can't think of other ones right now off the top of my head. But there are certainly other ones, and if I looked them up, I could find their names. The point being that text and image are also very interrelated in more fundamental ways. I think that one of the things good poetry and good writing does is conjure imagery. And when I started working with artificial neural networks in writing, one of my primary goals was to produce text that, even if it didn't make sense completely, would at least conjure imagery. So I think that those two things are very related in that direct sense, but also in the ways in which I've explored them in my practice with word camera and other projects like that, where it's literally image creating text. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think that's kind of a cliche, but it's also, an old saying, because it has to do with our fundamental relationship between text and image that goes on consciously when we think. We have a certain number of discrete senses. There are more than 5. There's proprioception and all these other ones you can measure that people don't talk about, like your ability to know where your nose is even when your eyes are closed. That's a sense. There are more medias than we have senses for, but fundamentally everything about art reflects the human experience. And that's what makes art interesting, I think, is if we can relate to it as humans in some way. Even art that is created by AI or that is influenced by AI, I think needs to reflect the human experience in order to appeal to a human audience. And in order to reflect the human experience, we need to be translating between images and text, because that's what we do with our brains.
Sasha, do we need AI to do the work of senses that aren't sufficient?
Do we need it? Yes, I think we do in a lot of ways. I mean, I have so many things that I want to say in response to many comments, and I wish this conversation could go on and on, because these are such big, juicy topics. And I think I wanted to respond quickly to what Ross was just saying, and say that one of the reasons that I do what I do now is because I've always been really interested in a lot of the ways that technologies are really impacting the way that we live our daily lives, but they're not reflected in a lot of the literature that we're reading or a lot of the poems that are being written right now. There are, even very contemporary best-selling novels very rarely reflect back to us a lot of what we're experiencing with our technologies. So that is something that really has motivated me. And what I found along the way is that poetry isn't just an art form. And so we're talking about like text and art and all that, but it's actually not just that. It's not just that. It actually is a technology. And I often think about poetry as being one of the oldest and the most fundamental technologies that humans have ever invented. And I think that's been really helpful to me in thinking through a lot of the way that I weave AI into my practice and the way I kind of justify to other poets who might be kind of skeptical of the work that I'm doing that poetry exists because back before the invention of language and back before we could write things down, before we had written records for things, we needed a way to save information. We needed a way to make sure that we could pass stories down through generations. We needed to make sure that we could remember legal information and all sorts of records. And so we invented things like rhyme and rhythm and meter and assonance because they made things really easy for us to remember. So I think about that a lot, and I like to think of poetry and technology and science and imagination and all these things as again erasing these binaries and bringing them all together. How they all require imagination, how they all can be augmented by using AI, which I often think of as augmented imagination. How we can really sort of help ourselves break open the limits that we're placing on ourselves by creating these categories, by labeling these things, and putting up divisions between them. And I think that's sort of been one of the big takeaways for me of being in this space is that a lot of those boundaries are starting to collapse a little bit, and I realize how artificial they are. And I think that's been really helpful for me as a poet, but also for me as a creative person working with lots of other creative people to understand how all these practices can link together in different ways, how we can all feed each other's imagination in different ways, and beyond the art circle, how we can use these tools to actually help do things in the real world and solve real problems by thinking beyond what we think we know or what we think we should be doing. So.
On that note, thanks, Sasha. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.